Hi, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to give people a minute, maybe, literally. Yeah, maybe a minute to roll in here.
60 seconds, exactly.
Tight 60. Let me share my screen.
And if you didn't get here, it's too bad. You're going to be left alone.
Ruined. All right, let me see. I know people they're like, I hate this part of the webinar. I hate the part where they riff.
Well, there's only like 20 people on so far, so
that's fair.
There'll be a few other people.
Only 20 people are subjected to the riff portion of the waiting.
Exactly.
All right. Really so are you able to see that, Seth, since you're the one speaking member I have?
I am.
Well, good. Well, hey, everybody. Again, I want to clarify that this is our first office hours. We're going to talk about what that means in a sec. We're going to pick a theme, kind of talk about it. By no means we have to stick to that. Obviously, we're going to keep this pretty informal. It's the first one we've done, so we're going to try to find our cadence and pace along the way. But tentatively, we're just like, hey, let's talk about not just CloudRadial implementation, but like straight up implementation, whether it's with your services, our services, other software in general. Just what does that look like? What are some challenges and so on and so forth?
We've been thinking about it a lot recently, though, with our own implementation services.
So where does that take us? That takes us to a little bit about CloudRadial. When we were even deciding like who to send this invite to, who gets to go to the office hours, one would think, obviously clients only. Clients would be the primary people that have questions. I wanted to open this up to multiple people too, to kind of get an idea of what we're thinking about. So I threw this slide on here too, just in case you're new, just in case you kind of don't know and you want to figure it out. What we do, right? We're a white labeled software. Easiest way to explain us is a client portal, but it does a bunch of stuff, right? So everything from account management stuff to ticketing to a lot of productivity QBR stuff, trying to kind of put that all into one platform so the end users have a really good experience. And there's obviously 1,000 things on top of that. But let's talk about who we are and why we're qualified to even be doing this, right? So we're the first 2 hires of CloudRadial, arguably industry experts. I hate using that term to pat myself on the back, but I feel like I do, because we've helped literally thousands. Obviously, Seth Wilson, Director of Biz Dev, quite the background on you, Seth, obviously, from what I know. You've got marketing on the background. You've got
I come from the ad agency world. Worked at big SaaS providers like dealer.com. Worked with Jeff, our founder, at an MSP, and then he brought me along here. So just professional services and how to deliver those things has always kind of been a fascination of mine.
Yeah, and then me, similar creative director at an ad agency that was specifically focused on MSPs, tech before that. Then I did implementations and professional services and everything from help desk stuff to managing firewalls. So I'm like a jack of all in the IT space in the first place. But like I said, what are we going to talk about today? Why is this a cool thing to do? We're talking about implementation. We're going to have an open discussion. So anyone who wants to chit chat, participate, again, share their thoughts, lead the conversation anyway. We certainly are open to that. So pretty open to whatever else we can think of on the fly. And then last but not least, a clarification of what office hours is, right? So office hours, we took our time, we looked up like what other people do for office hours. I think it's a good thing that a lot of companies do. So we want to make sure we know it's like, hey, it's not for support or feature requests necessarily. That kind of blurs the line a little bit, but really it's for talking about ideas, discussing news, sharing what we're thinking, sharing what you guys are thinking, seeing how that can kind of come together better. I threw the links on there not to be like shoo, but just in case you legitimately have a support question or feature request or whatever, and that way we have a place to direct them. And again, if you have one, I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to answer that. I'll just tell you, it's like, hey, so-and-so can help you. But that's to keep us kind of grounded and focused. So with that being said, we're not going to stick to the PowerPoint. Again, we're going to have a legitimate, just general conversation about what this stuff looks like. So I will probably stop the screen share so you don't see our little portraits wherever they are on the screen. I don't know. There we go.
Are huge.
So here we are, Seth. Let's talk implementation. I'll kick it off with, why is it so friggin' hard to implement stuff? Your thoughts, and then I'll tell you what I think, because I do them.
Well, it is one of those things that, and I think every MSP that's watching today has a similar experience, right? Like, you can give everybody laptops that have Teams on it, right? But you haven't necessarily helped them implement Teams. Just because they have it, right? And actually getting the thing implemented into their business, and something that they, oh, hey, Safi.
Daffy jumping in, trying to go for the stealth video off, couldn't do it in time. Now you're
Just hopping in.
Now you're
Hi.
talking.
But you know, it is one of those things that we've always had a focus on, you know, because it is one of our biggest drivers of growth, right? Is if people actually use the CloudRadial and they get results from it. But you know, this year has probably been it's probably our primary focus. Ricky has been in the dungeon writing a whole lot of implementation guides, right? But you know, it is one of those things that it's not up to you, right? Like you're not necessarily in control of it. The other party that you're implementing needs to do something, and that's always an interesting part too. But but at the same time, if you actually want it to be successful, you're going to have to take as much of that load as possible and carry them to that point. You know, if you yourself want to be successful.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of MSPs recently because I've been doing kind of like a shuffle internally. I'm trying to go between writing stuff that helps people implement CloudRadial better, but again, I'm kind of on a warpath to figure out, like, again, across the industry, what it takes to do a good implementation. I just talked to pretty in depth our partners, our new partners with Augment, right? They're a SaaS monitoring tool, and they have there are a lot of challenges of their own, right? So I think for a lot of the stuff, it comes down to a discussion of like, will this thing actually make me money? Is it going to be like a shelfware thing? Does anyone need it? Is it like a vanity project that the CEO decided we needed, and then the rest of the team's like, oh? And that, depending on where that comes from, usually changes the level of motivation. So I think, like, as a vendor, I'll just, again, try to like open it up and be real transparent. We always try to lead with, like, you know, the carrot at the end of that stick, right? It's like, what are you trying to get from it? And I feel if you lose sight of that, the implementation always gets kind of muddied. So one of the things, and I'll share it again, it's not like, I really don't want these office hours to be like a advertisement necessarily for CloudRadial, more so just, again, open discussion, but I feel like it's relevant. We were trying to, again, kind of grease the wheels, trying to give people a way to not just get handed a platform, not just get handed like a couple of calls with people and going, okay, hopefully you understood this, and if you didn't, then tough. So, like, again, those familiar with the platform, with our platform, it's really big, right? It does a bunch of stuff, and that's a good thing if you're looking for depth and strategy. But again, if you're new to it, or if you have it already and you haven't really done anything with it, you get the idea of like, where do you begin, right? And again, there's videos and Academy and stuff, and I've made that mistake personally too. Just because you have training, just because you have all these different resources, doesn't mean you're laid out a path for anyone. You really have to try to make this stuff easy to consume. And this applies also, of course, to MSPs and how you implement your clients, right? How do they get that path forward? You have a bunch of resources, a bunch of tools, a bunch of services, but if they're just lying around waiting for the client to get to them, chances are they never will.
Well, and that's one of the things that I have learned, you know, working at both SaaS providers and MSPs, right? Is that we're not radically different. You know, there is this sort of like, there's MSPs and there's vendors, and like, we really don't do anything all that differently from a structural standpoint, right? We take a whole bunch of other SaaS products, we combine them into something with our own intellectual property of something of unique value, and we charge a monthly fee for them. And time again, I have seen the exact same issues. Like if the you know, as much as we're struggling with implementation, it's the same as my experience in the MSP side and vice versa. So it really, you know, normally we find that these are things that are just nothing different, just a slightly different package. We're just kind of calling ourselves something a little different.
Totally. And again, it's evident in the way that whenever we talk about like stacks and tools and seat costs, whatever, it's, again, a mixture of the tools you have, the processes you have, the people you have running them. But that's the same thing. I mean, again, if you look at that compared to us, it's like, okay, well, we have an Azure bill, and then we have so-and-so for security, we have so-and-so for this. Coming together, that's our software product. So it is very, very similar. But yeah, as far as implementation, again, we as a company have made, maybe not the mistake, but the assumption that training was akin to implementation. Obviously, it's not. Training is a part of the implementation cycle. Again, I would think the same thing for you guys. Showing your clients how to do something once isn't really going to do it forever, right? We talk about this.
It's also a matter of scale too, right? Like it was, we could also sort of like fill in the gaps of training when like there was just, we just had 50 of you partners out there, right? And now that we're at like 800 partners, we can't necessarily get on the phone, you know, at 9 o'clock at night with everybody, you know, and spend a couple hours. We still do a lot of that, right? But how do you like what works, again, as a small SaaS provider or a small MSP doesn't work as a large MSP or a large SaaS provider. So you do need to kind of rethink those things.
Yeah. And in the past, again, like you said, what we had done is we had the time about, to kind of break everything down, and we had the resources to go, hey, we're going to have so many things, and we can still scale that. But what I wanted, again, because I've seen this with so many of our partners, is that the failure to implement kills both of us, right? Both us and the MSP, because it kills us because obviously our revenue is gone from software, but it kills the MSP because, again, the idea is still good. The need for a client-facing portal or a security software, whatever, it's important. You needed it in the first place, and you don't want the journey kind of dragging down the whole destination. So back to what I was saying before and what I flashed on the screen for a second is I've been trying to kind of figure out how we as a company can smooth that process out. And two things really have come to mind, which is I wanted to clarify, because a lot of people have asked about like what's different, because we now charge for an implementation, and it's a lot different than what we used to do before. Again, it was just like this. I'd tell you, I'd show you, go, hey, click on this and this and this, and there was a structure to it, right? You got recordings, you've got meetings, you have this, but that puts us in the same position that you guys do. If so-and-so doing the onboarding and the training decides to leave, if they weren't paying that good attention, let's say you put the junior guy on it and the junior guy just phoned it in, your tool that you genuinely needed now is not implemented. And it's either going to be shelfware, costs you don't want to pay for, or just gone, right? So my thing was like, hey, let's give people something to ground themselves with. Let's give something that we can kind of operate with. So literally an operation guide based off their objectives. So I know, again, and I'll speak for our tool, but apply this logic to basically anything you guys have too. You have to figure out what you want out of that platform or tool or whatever else you got and how to get it. So what we did is, again, CloudRadial being pretty huge with the things, you can do so many things in it. People come to us now with objectives, and we give you the playbook along with the training and along with implementation resources, which we'll talk about in a sec, to actually get it out the door. And I feel like this is a really good formula because now it's not just the gaps, right? So our process now went from let's talk to you about it to let's talk to you about it. Let's give you something tangible to work with. We did a little art with architectural drawings. And then we have like a big playbook of all our stuff, right? So especially with a product like ours that requires not just a set of instructions. It's not like this is the instruction manual to how to use the portal. It's a lot of the rationales. What you'll see in a lot of these guides that we have is like, hey, like, what are we talking about? Like, who are we talking to, right? In this case, this one's for QBRs. How do you actually operate a QBR in the portal? Who is supposed to read it? Who's in charge of it, right? Delegating those important people. I think, is it Seth that says it? I think it's Seth. Is it the one that the if two people are in charge of something, nobody is, or more than one?
Yeah.
That's, and I've found that time and time again. Every time I get on an implementation call or have been on one, if it's me and 6 people and it's just like, hey, we should get this done, it's never going to get done. No one's going to do it, right? If John has to get it done and everyone else has to see what John has to do, great. So a lot of our guides, again, are not just like, here's this thing on how to do it, but like, let's find out what you go into. Then this, I feel, is important. Your mileage may vary depending on the tools or how you do it. I've seen MSPs do this for their own tools, which is also, or for their own processes, rather than, again, just saying, hey, you click this button to submit a ticket, good luck, client. You want to talk to them about why, how, how can you improve it? How will that change or whatever? We try to do something similar, right? Instead of just telling you, hey, you want to put a logo in your portal, click on this PNG, done. Be like, hey, it makes your client feel like you actually have something ready. Makes you feel like, you have a branded thing that is actually a client experience to deal with. If you just have like a blank thing with holes in it, no good, right? A lot of this stuff is basically just rationale talk with further explanation. It's not critical as far as getting this out the door, but with our product specifically, if you don't get it, it's just that much harder to understand what you're trying to do in the first place. When you go further into it, right? Again, this one's a QBR guide. You're going to see obviously that it gets more specific, right? So when we're talking about like, how do you modify the categories in our account planner? How do you do a report from CloudRadial, blah, blah, blah. And then past that, there has to be, this is what I was saying before, the actual training concept of it, right? So we prefer to do this in person, right? I don't read people the guide and make you literally follow the checklist, but this tries to solve the problem that if I'm not on this call and I'm not literally walking you through this, how do you remember how to do it, right? It's like, are you going to do the training? You're going to go navigate to a training portal, whatever. Same problem everybody else has. It's like when a client's not actively talking to you and they want to reset their password, what do you do, right? Do you send them an article? Do you proactively do that? Do you tell them where to find it? or do you try to organically make that a part of the process? And that's what people are finding. That's why stuff like AI bots offering suggestions to articles pop up and this and that, because it's like, I think as a world, we're trying to kind of understand that the path of least resistance is probably the correct one, right? Just give people something that is kind of foolproof. So we're trying to shore up these holes by going, if you're not talking to me, I have a guide. If you talk to me, we do it. And then the last big part of implementation, especially with a tool like ours, is our implementation isn't complete until it gets in the hands of a client, right? Because again, I personally have gotten pretty good about talking to you guys, and you guys spit game back at me as far as how to use the tools and how to do the stuff. But if the client never gets it, then the client portal is a failure, right? And so then it's your portal.
Yeah. And getting a couple questions, sort of like, hey, how do I get this thing, right? And this is actually he's showing you the sort of output of one of the 6 implementation jumpstarts that we have available. So when you sign up, we make them mandatory these days. Some of the older some of the older CloudRadial partners on the call, slipped on by and maybe just got the academy, but we make them mandatory now. And so he was showing you the sort of before it is all filled in and properly applied to your business, the QBR Jumpstart. So if you're interested in getting a guide like this, which is really intended to be, new pages within your operations guide, not just training one person up on something, but like, we really want to actually have something in your operation guide on how to run this this client experience through a portal. And so that's what that is. So if folks asking for that file, if you're interested in that, we can make you one that's specifically for your business that talks about how it works within your MSP specifically. And that's just to kind of answer those questions.
Yeah, and to the implementation side, right? So let me bring that back to implementation. Why do you even need that, right? Why don't we just distribute these widely? And I've had that question too. People are like, it's easy, right? You want people to use your product, give me the guide, make it easy for me, whatever. It's like, yeah, right. Because I've talked to, again, like 1,000 of you, and 1,000 of you are completely different. And every time, like, it looks great on the surface. I go, hey, here's how you run a QBR. And then I go, well, how do you sell your services? What do you do? It's like, oh, that guy sells managed services. That guy has security, managed services, backup, whatever. That guy has custom packages. He has Acme security, Acme protection plus, whatever. So when it gets down to it, this guide stops making sense pretty fast if you don't actually go through and tweak it to your standards, right? So it's not as easy. I wish it were, because again, I'd be a billionaire. I'd go, hey, here's how to use the product. It works. Follow the checklist. You're done. No, right? This is why it requires a conversation to say like, okay, here's all these different things about how a stock one works. Do you deviate from that? Do you align perfectly? Maybe you do. Even at the very end of this, I'll skip past some of this stuff, right? It gets down to like, what are your exceptions? This is super common. And again, from an implementation side, it starts to get real. A lot of software doesn't have to go this deep. We do, because when it gets down to the point where it's like, hey, it's a client portal. How cool is that? Oh yeah, it's pretty cool. What about if I'm trying to do an onboarding form? It's like, oh, here's how an onboarding form works. Okay, well, my dental clinic client needs these 3 licenses that no other client needs. Now what? It's like, now that's an exception to the process, right? So you have to document that. And for new people to try to actually develop a genuine operational guide to get some genuine implementation in, it takes documentation, it takes thoughts and all that stuff. That's why we throw it in here. So again, I wish it were that simple. I wish it would be like, hey, everybody on this thing gets this thing, but it might not be that helpful if you don't actually go through and fill it out and kind of work through it. So, right? But as a whole, again, I'm finding that even other software we use a bunch of other software ourselves, right? We use one that tracks kind of user behavior in the portal. We do one that tracks, obviously, like you have your Google Analytics, you have your, there's a bunch of analytic ones. I won't like name drop a bunch, but the process for implementing those is the same thing. It's like, how do I do this? How do I really get started? And you have to have dedicated people and all that stuff. But even this part where it's like, okay, go through and do this and do this and do this. Oh, but we track our cookies this way. All of a sudden now I have to change our process. So getting down and dirty is pretty much the only way we can do it. Our CEO always says, like, win them one at a time. It's kind of hard to scale this, but I think that now that we're starting to get more refined with how we've seen people implement, right? We know the gotchas, we know the things that are easy wins and all that stuff. It should start to make things a little bit easier. There's one more thing I want to say as well on marketing resources and whatnot, but I'm going to pause here to see if Seth has anything to say about my rant on implementation stuff. If not, I'll just keep going.
No, I mean, that is great. And I think that's, lots of people asking for those guides. So we must be on to something there.
It helps because, again, it's like I understand everybody's need for it, because if you're not doing it, we have the academy, right? And this is for those that maybe have never used it or that don't know about it. This is not gone. It's not like this is defunct. It's still a primary thing. But remember, training is a subset of implementation. And I personally, because I was in charge of kind of just designing the flow, have made the mistake of relying too heavily on it. So previously, what we used to do is when we did the implementations to people, be like, hey, hop on in, let's get started, right? Let me give you an overview, right? What are your goals? What are you trying to do? Pretty standard stuff that you might do with a client of yours too. What do you want to get done? What are your technology struggles? All that kind of stuff. Now, again, focusing down on the key aspects of what they want is important. You go, okay, so what we did, obviously software, I go, hey, before we can start talking about goals and acquiring them, there's some like base things that you don't want to spend a bunch of money learning just because you want to hear me talk about how to press a button and do a thing. So if you go to your partner and account section, your CloudRadial user, you're going to find that you have a little academy button up there, a little academy button at the top right. And basically you can self-invite yourself, and you can basically put people in your invite list. If you hit the invite button, it pre-fills with all the people that are listed as administrators, but you can manually type people or remove people as you want. But the academy is a training thing, right? So every single thing in our academy puts you in here. We kind of had all of the same things that are really close to those implementation guides. Actually, they mirror them almost exactly, are up here in these little silos. So our thought process was, hey, gave you the software, gave you an onboarding, showed you kind of like where stuff is, but to actually learn it, right? Everybody learns at a different pace. Some guy might get it in 5 minutes. Some guy might take a couple hours to kind of repeat muscle memory, do it. How do you do that? How do you scale that? Well, besides knowledge base articles, you go, hey, if I really care about ticketing in CloudRadial, I'm going to go straight to this one. I'm going to learn how to, manage all this stuff. If they do it, right? If they sign up, if they know about it, there's so many ifs to all of this stuff. So the other thing that happened a lot, if people self-train, self-learn, I guess, they get overwhelmed very easily because they get in here and they go like, look at all this stuff I got to learn. I'm just trying to learn how to submit a ticket. And I get that. It's like, you really just need one lesson in here. You don't need to jam 6 whole things. They don't take that long, but still it's a lot of like superfluous information. So this thing is now something we kind of integrated in. So rather than doing what we used to do, which is like, hey, go through the academy and then we'll chit chat. And like, once you get your bearings, now it's like, hey, you came to us for QBRs. You want to learn QBRs. There's the basics. Everybody has to know these. Like, okay, here you go, right? Branding and company groups and features. That's some of the core building blocks of CloudRadial. But then after that, you go, okay, now it's QBR time. Maybe now I prescribe you, right, as your implementer, do lesson 1, do lesson 5, right? Lesson 5 is all about QBRs. And then here's the guide, because again, you're not going to be able to force everybody to watch a bunch of videos in the academy or all that stuff, right? So trying to reduce that barrier, trying to build that process is part of the implementation. So we as a company are trying to reinforce that by offering more resources and trying to smooth that path out. The last one that I think is a really important thing that we've not done a great job of in the past, we have had some of it, but I'm currently making a concentrated effort to make it a thing, is the marketing resources. Because what happens in our journey with implementation, how we've learned how to handle it, is we put people in here, we got them training. We now got to the point, thanks to the training, thanks to some consulting and stuff, where people are pretty dang good at using CloudRadial. Like they know their stuff. They can zip around, they can do everything I can do and more. And then what, right? Then you have all these clients loaded up and we're just not seeing the usage. Well, why not? It's like, well, most of the time when I talk to people, the usage comes down to, we just don't know how to, right? And that's the biggest problem I've seen with implementation out of all of them. It's not training, it's not organizing the processes. So the guide is nice. That wasn't really ever my biggest issue, right? It's a good thing to have, it's very important. But the biggest issue is that last push. And that last push comprises of like, let's keep it a really simple example, right? You're trying to use CloudRadial as a ticketing portal. You've got everything set up, all your custom forms and everything, right? You've got everything dialed in super good. You've got all of your stuff perfect. Even the clients that needed to have that stuff customized, their specific thing is all customized. Okay. The launch process has always been confusing for people because sometimes the admin is the only one that puts tickets in for people. That's really common for a lot of people. Sometimes you have everybody being able to do it, but how do you get the message out? What do you say to them? So
Well, that's what,
previously, go ahead.
too, just to jump in briefly, is that's what makes it difficult about doing this for several hundred people. And it's like, same thing with the NSP. Like as you scale, there are some clients where you can just give them 100 laptops that have Teams on it, and they start using Teams beautifully. I've seen that, and they need no help whatsoever, right? And then there's other companies where it's just like, more people are against it than not. No one knows how to share a file on there. Like it can grind the company to a halt because all of a sudden no one knows how to communicate, because they were using Slack or something like that. And that is just one of those things that does pop up, is because every client's different. They have different needs. Some clients, like was example, and when you're looking at like our service too, and we're trying to gauge, are we doing what we need to for our partners? Some partners get the thing out beautifully. They have a marketing department, and they can, you can roll it out, and they've got videos and stuff like that. But yeah, trying to get that result for everybody sometimes requires you stepping in and giving a little extra help.
Yeah, and that's basically it. Like we're on this warpath to try to figure out how we can make this a process, how we can make this a part of the implementation journey. And again, to me, a big part of that was helping them with resources. So there's a thing that exists that we used to use religiously. It's kind of taken a backseat. It was something that we used at the very, very beginning. I think it's still useful, and I'm planning on kind of refreshing it, bringing it back, which was, we had this supplementary document called the blueprint, and older partners will remember this. We used to talk about it all the time. It's still in here. It's a little buried. You see it if you're in trial, but most times, obviously, you're not, right? You're trying to figure out how to do it from a live tenant. Again, partner account. I talked about the academy up here before. In this case, there's a little section on the right-hand panel for support, and there's a little deployment blueprint, right? So this thing is not mission critical. It's not like you have to know about this to be successful with CloudRadial, but it used to be kind of our guiding organizational thing on how to do CloudRadial. So this thing, again, in the process of trying to get implementation out there, we basically look at this whole journey of like, what does it take from start to finish? And it's still relevant today. Like, it's crazy. We wrote this like 2 years ago. It hasn't really changed. It just talks about, right, we're not going to necessarily dive through all this stuff, just saying like implementation means going from us to you to probably that gatekeeper, that administrator, to maybe the executives and the end users. This is the path of least resistance, right? When you talk about implementing a software, especially a client-facing one, you got to get buy-in, right? You got to get a reason that the client would even want to use it. Sometimes, again, you might have that relationship where you can lay down the iron fist and say, well, you're going to do this, and they're going to go, okay, that's what it takes to work with you. That's way easier to do with new clients, but especially with a client portal software, you get to say, this is how we do it, and they were trained by that. It's not that easy with existing ones, right? We recognize that with existing clients. I always say the old dog, new tricks, right? They're used to email and phone call. They're not just going to suddenly change their behavior because you have it, right? You have to put effort into it. So this is saying like, hey, when you're done with all your stuff and you kind of go up there, what's next, right? Maybe you talk about what they need. Maybe you go to an executive presentation after you've passed kind of the administrator. Maybe you deploy it and announce it and all that stuff to the clients. So what I'm talking about as a whole is we're kind of making a concentrated effort to make that process a lot easier. In this giant blueprint, our thing was like, hey, at all these different stages, what are you going to do? When you're doing the number 2, which is just the setup, like, well, did you do your feature sets and company groups, like the basic stuff, right? What about custom articles and tickets and courses and blah, blah, blah? Cool. And then again, this is what we're really talking about here. This is my personal struggle over the last 2 years. And I'm finally at a point where I feel really good about where CloudRadial is going to help out. It's this. It's kind of doing more of a specifically targeted walkthrough of like, give them a guide on how to submit tickets, right? Give them a guide on how approvals work. Make sure they have a guide that shows them how the portal works as a whole. Oh, now it actually opens up in window. Cool. Edge is doing a good job. Anyways, right? So it's like, give them something similar to what we have. And even if you don't literally hand it to them, put it in their portal, make it easy for them to access, right? Smooth that curve out, make it feel like there's support for this. It's not something they're going to magically flock to if you never talk about it. So a lot of the stuff in here, we're again kind of putting more effort in. So we're talking about like, maybe a welcome email. We have a couple of these in here, but just refreshing them, right? Announcement emails and sales slicks and all this other stuff, kind of like Microsoft does with their partner resources, helps to not have you be, a master designer or have a full marketing department if you want to get this out. And that becomes a part of your process too. So back in those guides I was talking about, right? Is it enough for me to talk to you? No. Is it enough for me to talk to you and give you a guide? Let's get better, right? Because now we have a backbone, which if you're not talking to me, you still have that process. But this part after that, it's if I get those golden 3 in there, I go, I talk to you, right? We've had a conversation. I know your needs. You know what I can do. You know my limits as a software. You have a process that's customized to you. And lastly, you have a deployment process, right? You have a what is customizing the launch part. At the very end of this guide, in every single guide, there's what is deploying a portal to a new company looks like. It's kind of sparse on information because, again, that depends on you, right? Does it mean sending the admin a welcome guide saying this is how we're going to do it from now on? And then we're going to deploy the desktop app and then this, right? That's very subjective. But that's the kind of stuff that you need to do, because building that last leg of the deployment process is what helps people kind of push it across and actually get value out of it. Again, we have to deal with that because our software is so dense, has so much stuff in there, but it's really not that different with anything. Again, obviously I'm doing a bunch of CloudRadial stuff, but I wanted to talk about that as a whole, right? Even with MSPs, we talk about that all the time. I always ask, what's your onboarding process looks like? Well, it might be a PDF that says, here's all the helpful links to the stuff we use. Here's your billing portal, here's this. It might be an email, it might be a conversation, right? Same problem we have, scaling that up, making it smooth, making it sure that regardless of who does that implementation, that consultation, the quality is the same, the result is the same, is really friggin' hard. That's why we're reverting to these kind of like more structured guides, because it helps to ensure that regardless of who gives it. If somebody, it's their first day doing one versus a seasoned veteran, I still don't want you to fail because somebody didn't know, right? I want you to be go like, well, I get the point and I have everything I need to do it. So it's still good, right? That's the challenge of implementation for us in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the you know, if it's also just kind of surviving basic staff turnover, right? Like it's just about making a plan that you know is going to be successful. Like if you're offering a product or a service, right? You know, and the implementation plan is to just, you know, really train somebody up, right? You are kind of suddenly you're ignoring the fact that that person might go get another job, right? It's what we talk about in our platform a lot, right? Like we want to replace the trust the client has in you with evidence, right? Because sometimes that person that trusts you gets another job and you get thrown out with the bathwater. Kind of same thing with us, and you know why we find implementation so important is that the person that gets trained up on it might go get another job, right? They might go bring CloudRadial with them, and that's awesome, right? But then you're left with a product that you don't necessarily understand how to use. And I think that for me in a couple different walks of life, not just in the MSP space, but also in the marketing space. When I was doing SEO, you know, getting 50 blog writers to all do the same thing, you know, I'll get on the same page, like when only 2 of them are ever talking to you. How do you get that information out to everybody? There's all, you know, whatever professional service you're doing, there is always a need for something like this, and it always tends to pay off. It's a lot of extra work that's really, you know, hard and tedious sometimes, but the payoff and the time savings in the end of actually just making sure that the business knows how to use something versus just an employee knows how to do something, it's radically different.
Yeah, it's that the baby out with the bathwater thing happens a lot. I mean, again, because we obviously monitor, me personally, I monitor support too. And a lot of times we see the tickets come in going, hey, so-and-so left and they were kind of our ticket updating person. So like, what do we do? And we have the same problem, right? Same problem that you guys have. That's why we always stick to that part. They're like, we're very, very alike. Like a lot of the challenges that we have, we've been hitting the conferences like really hard. We're going to hit them even harder next year. And like just talking about it again, not CloudRadial specifically, just processes. It's ridiculous. I mean, like Seth and I literally are always like, hey, like it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing.
Yeah.
Are those encyclopedias over Seth's right shoulder? I think
well, it's actually I guess it's my left, right? But yeah, that's
stage left.
Yeah, those are the encyclopedias my mom bought back at the supermarket back in the 90s. You know, she bought like one every time she'd go to the supermarket. But yeah, you know, it's like most of these are just filler. This is a lot of filler.
My eye is always drawn to the yellow gin book. I see that yellow book on gin and I love it.
Yeah, yeah, you know, it's a smattering of my interests, I should say, I guess.
I always, I'm so surprised. Yeah, exactly. Like Todd, Safi yells at me every single time, going, take down the sword. And I go, no,
It's her
I see it
personality.
back,
You know?
I see it back there, and I've just been fuming.
First of all, we're on an office hour, so it's informal anyways. Let me just bust this out. First of all, this is the flame of the West.
Oh,
It is a Lord of the Rings, of course.
forged by the elves, you know.
It was. In which age? You know?
In the third age, right?
It is in the third age,
It
correct.
was in the third age.
Yes. Also, it's a bed. Don't let that distract you.
Well, someone actually has some actual questions here. Actually, got a couple questions, and I'll go back to some
Well,
of the
we've got
earlier
people
ones.
commenting on the sword.
It's in office hours. It's not supposed to be me slinging product. It's just chit chatting.
Yeah, we're talking about this, but you know, kind of we'll move into the questions and answers portion of this. But really, throw out what you got. You know, so questions again. You know, we got a big marketing background, but we also have a big CloudRadial background. Anything that you guys want to talk about, we might be able to answer. Kind of starting really kind of early in the call, Brian threw a question our way, and we'll answer the tough ones because he brings up a really good point. You know, that he says that he uses, and I'll just read what he wrote. You know, he uses CloudRadial as a single source of truth when it comes to users, devices, etc. We struggle getting all our devices and users in there because mobile devices, handhelds by Intune, or that are handled by Intune, and network devices handled by Datto RMM. We also have Mac, Linux, etc. Ultimately, we struggle using CloudRadial for compliance when it misses the boat on the first pillar of Nest with identify. What does CloudRadial plan to do to solve this? And Brian, that's a really good question. And you know, as the biz dev guy, it's like, you know, I probably should be doing more of that and then webinars, right? Making sure
I needed your help.
And it is a really multi-layered answer to that question. You know, one, what we plan on doing is, you know, more and better integrations. You know, that tends to be one of the biggest obstacles. We want to have all the data we can possibly have in that platform. Sometimes the APIs aren't available. Sometimes it requires too many API lookups to be like, you know, feasible. You know, that sometimes the people that we're pulling from are like, hey, get off our API, you're making too many calls, right? And so there is some of that we're working through. That said, that's the end goal is to be that and to be that for you, Brian. I mean, and we love how you use CloudRadial, and that, and you're exactly right. We need to continue to fill that picture out. There are some fixes here and there, and you know, we're really excited to be, you know, doing more and more work with like people like LionGuard that are kind of a clearinghouse for integrations and information. But that is very much how our product's going to evolve, at least from the ecosystem standpoint.
Yeah, the compliance one's a good question because like, we have a guide on how to use CloudRadial for compliance too, and there's some of that, right? So the question of like, what should CloudRadial be pulling in and be just like native in there versus like what is basically out of scope, and we're like, oh, we need like Seth saying, we need a security thing to pull it in too. So it's like deciding that is exceptionally, I'll say, spicy in this industry, because what happens is we want partners to work with it, and for us it's like the development to create these like security things starts changing literally how we look at ourselves as a product. It's like, are we a security platform and a client portal? Do we do this? And again, something like compliance, especially for NIST, if we're doing like a NIST framework stuff, fits the mold. That's not a particularly like crazy one, but in general we always have to be super careful, because if we start going down one path, then it kind of opens up, well, what about SOC 2? What about this? What about this other framework? What about HIPAA? What about high tech? What about, and then we're like, we don't know. So what we've done in the past, and I think what we'll continue to do, like Seth's saying, is we basically want to leverage the experts in those fields to bring it in, and we really want to focus on the client facing one. So chances are, yeah, we'll end up seeing some stuff probably with LionGuard opening them up more, trying to nail down more of the sources in there, because identify is literally the one that needs to aggregate the data in the first place. So yeah. It's tough. I mean, that's not a one that I'd be like, yeah, we're going to do XYZ next question, but we'll have to think about like literally who we partner with and how it pulls it in. Like same thing with, like I said, we just did one with Augment, right? So Augment pulls in, they have multiple products, and Augment does, like, they do like a discovery tool of like SaaS, you know, just what SaaS products does somebody use. They do like a management one, and then they do like a security one. And currently, like with them, we only do the discovery one. Similar thing though, if we could pull in more of like their security stuff, that makes it more viable to discuss security matters for like NIST and whatnot, right? So it's just a matter of tweaking it, making sure the APIs work and don't break whenever. So yeah, good question though.
Yeah, for sure. We got another one just talking about the agent. This is from Jeff Nero, and he's a question regarding the agent install and using existing agent from their PSA, which is Synchro in this case, that's pulling the same information that CloudRadial agent is pulling into CloudRadial. And it basically asks like, how do we pull the information from Synchro? And today, not really possible. We do use our own agent, and there's a couple reasons for that, right? Like it's not just we want to have our own agent, right? We would love to be able to pull from all our RMMs, but there is again just kind of like basic data reasons why that isn't always practical, but it's also the nature of the information that we're gathering and giving you that separation versus your RMM tool or your PSA where you're grabbing absolutely everything in an infrastructure versus the presentation that you have for your client, right? That's different information, and we also pull in a couple other pieces, like the approximate machine age, and warranty information and stuff like that. So there are some advantages to using it. Sits alongside of that, but I don't know if you have anything else to say on that, Ricky, but that was one of the questions you were getting.
The thing that I was used to kind of die on as far as sword dying is basically that I think we wanted to, and like from the beginning we've proven that we can, and chances are we eventually will. Not anytime soon though, because like take a look at what we do for Macs, right? So for Macs we don't have a native Mac agent. What do we do? Well, we have Adigy, which is a Mac RMM. So what we figured out is that Adigy is able to pull in the information nearly identically to how we structure it ourselves with our own agent. Took a couple of tweaks here and there, but for the most part, that was like it is our proof of concept that we can do something like that, right? Now, that was something that was relatively easy for us to do because again, the information was selected in the right way and all that stuff. I think it is going to be possible to do that with all these other things. Again, the challenge has always been not pulling in the information because realistically, I'm sure it's not that tough to do, but what we do with that data is the tough thing, right? The policies, the dashboards, all that kind of stuff. We have so much infrastructure tied to relaying that data, setting off alerts to that data, all that other stuff. And you would not be surprised by how every single RMM pulls something completely differently. Everybody else looks at the same thing from different angles, and developing to that is a freaking nightmare. So chances are, in my grand vision, probably what will happen in a more mature CloudRadial eventually down the line is you're going to see what PSA and what RMM, and then we're going to be able to have all those things tied to the RMM. Again, that's a tremendous amount of dev work. That's like scrap what we currently have and redo type thing. But eventually that's nice because even for ourselves, it comes up every now and then as a buying objection going like, I already have this data and I want to deploy another thing, which we're aware of. It's not like we're like, no, we need our agent. We just do it for simplicity. And again, the client facing thing is true. Some of those things spit way too much data out that just drowns the client. But yeah, so that's basically, I still stick to that. I think eventually you will see a CloudRadial that does that. It's just practical reasons right now why we can't, and also client facing stuff too.
Lack of magic. That's as soon as we get some more magic. But Alistair Struthers, which love that name, by the way, ask a kind of a related question that's kind of relevant to that. If it's not too cheeky to ask, he says, I'd love to understand. Yeah, I like the word. I'd love to understand how the feature requests are priorities or prioritized, I assume he says, and worked through. There's obviously a lot of great suggestions on there. I probably have about 15 submitted myself. Yeah. And I know Jeff picks up on anything that already exists or flat out won't be implemented, but what happens to the rest?
Yeah, that process is one that like a lot of people are like, how does that work? Basically, I'll tell you what happened from the beginning because Seth and I were there when the old magic was written. Basically, like CloudRadial, it did what anything else that gets more mature happens. So like before it used to be, like we're talking years and years ago, Jeff and Safi, right? But Jeff sitting and kind of developing out the product, sketching it out and all that stuff. And then when he started getting his first couple clients, they used to be like, hey, the product really needs this. Okay. And then like in like a weekend, you just like pump it out and all of a sudden there'd be a new wing to the product and all that stuff. And then what happened is obviously we started getting more mature, we started getting processed and all that stuff. And we were still kind of there. We still had the feature request list came up in the first place because started getting to the point where he didn't have phone calls to everybody. So we started putting that up there now. And people would log it and he would kind of work that through like a backlog. And then what happened is more and more and more clients, and then we started getting people like we need like an upvote system essentially, because we have to kind of decide, well, what is the greater need for the product? Who needs what? How feasible is it? How viable is it? So right now what we have is we have another developer that nobody will ever see because he hates the camera, named Michael. I'll name drop him. And Michael's job is basically to kind of sweep that list and determine what's happening right now. Michael currently has been on this like ridiculously huge project that I think he's just coming off of to do role-based access, and with our other developers, he's working on logging as well. So he's been the one that usually kind of calls the play and all that other stuff. And then usually what happens is he sweeps the list, he kind of determines it, and then it just gets up. So there's not really any magic there as saying like, oh, there's a secret thing in every third request. And like we see, it's like right now, we've kind of let it fall to the wayside because we've been working on this like basically infrastructure changing thing to CloudRadial, but we should be picking up on that pretty soon. Going back to, again, it's literally just like an upvote system mixed with how viable is that for us to do. You'll see stuff like, 16,000 upvotes on a Mac agent or something like that. And you're like, whoa, they have to do it now. It's like, well, still, if there's 16,000 on that and then 1,000 on like, can you add an add button that does this? You'll see that add button like tomorrow, I promise. And the Mac agent's going to hold off.
And to give you some of the inside pool too, there's like, it's a blend, right? Like there's so much, it's not so much a process, right? And you don't want it to be a process. That's when SaaS products get, not as good, and it's kind of later in life when it's really just kind of a mechanical process where we're shifting through this stuff. It's a blend of like a process, a democracy, the interest that you guys show, but also like the vision. And the vision Jeff's always had, right, has been like a very strong one. He knows the thing he wants to build, right, and then he, for the most part, uses your guys' ideas to actually flesh that thing out. So that is, in my experience, like you hear a lot of talk about like, oh, they got bought by a VC, or oh, they got private equity, they're not going to be good anymore, right? It's not so much that money ruins a business. That's not true at all, right? It gives you all sorts of new ways to get better, but it's much more the guys that had the insight and the vision aren't there anymore. That's normally what the thing is. And so being able to blend those two is really important. The other thing too, and just to plug the biz dev end of this, right? When it comes to those features on the other side, when we're talking about, a feature request that involves another vendor or another service to work with, a lot of that too, as far as the viability and the ability for to even do it, comes from the pressure on that other end. It's very much been you guys' advocacy for us with those other vendors saying, hey, I got to have my CloudRadial in here. That seems to be the thing that makes it most possible for us, because instead of an uphill climb where we're just kind of blindly trying to code to a public API, we do get the actual support from them to really make a solution that makes both of our solutions better together. And that's what we're always trying to target.
The case in point of that was like killer, that like worked out like super smooth, was Smileback, right? Because we have a CSAT built into CloudRadial, right? Our CSAT logic was like, look, we're doing tickets, we're talking to the PSA. Why not have something that allows them to give feedback right there and then, as well as after? And then what happened was somebody said, hey, I use Smileback. I like your tool, like CloudRadial. I don't want to ditch Smileback because I like Smileback better. Can you work with them? And then enough people basically talked to them, and Smileback just came to us and was like, hey, like, can we do something? It's like, yes. And literally that's it, right? So now you have the option, but that thing came about like crazy. It just was like, hey, we need this net new thing. And they worked with us and it was over. But that was because they pushed. There's kind of two different nuances there, right? There's the integration based one, and then there's other ones that are like literal product features. Sometimes people come and say, I want a button there, or can we do this to do this instead? Usually that stuff is easier. That stuff is like somebody sits down and goes, okay, we just have to do this. But like I said, it's kind of on us. I'll be the first to publicly say like, hey, we've been lagging on it, but mostly because, again, we've been working on this ridiculous thing that has been like taking up a bunch of the developers' time. We got like 4 devs working on it, and
yeah, probably worth kind of talking about that too, because
probably.
Just to kind of give you guys, because I think you guys are used to like us having like a product update that's like 20 features long every single month, right? And like probably haven't, it's been like we're still doing that, but maybe every other month now. And that a lot of that, goes to our enterprise feature set that, again, we're not going to talk too much about. We'll leave it for actually a proper announcement. But anybody that's looking for more kind of an enterprise experience with CloudRadial, logging and things of that nature for compliance reasons. That's that sort of thing. We're getting better on that, but we're really putting a lot of time into it for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that, and that's just it seems like, oh, we should add a couple things here and there to do this, and then you like look back, and I guess the technical debt is the real term for it, right? It ends up being monumental for stuff that seems like it's a joke. It's like, yeah, just add a button there that does this. Like, oh, oops, we got to rewrite it, which is a beauty. But I will say, working with having an actual team of developers to like do stuff now is a lot nicer because they actually have processes. So it should get very reliable now because we actually have a process too.
Yeah, we staffed
Sprinted
up
out.
considerably this year, compared to what we for sure.
Compared to 4, but like a couple of years ago, it was just me, Seth, Sappy, and Jeff. But yeah,
Brian also kind of bringing up an interesting thing here, the conversation in general, talking about tool fatigue and having too many tools, and he asked questions like anyone else tool fatigue like me and trying to do more with less, and that actually points to like an interesting philosophy that we have taken to our platform. Like we try to be a tool belt, right? We want to, if you're doing something for a client, we want to make sure the client sees that you're doing that and they see the evidence that you're doing that thing, right? But to a certain degree, we want to be a multi-tool too, right? Like things like warranty lookups. It was like a weekend of Jeff's programming time to get warranty lookups put in the platform, and so like when we can replace it, we in things like CSAT with Smileback, we don't necessarily do it as well, but we do try to focus on that like 20% of functionality that hits the 80% of the actual good that it does. And like, yeah, we know that about some of our tools where it's like, could be a whole lot better, could be a lot more featured like so-and-so competitor, but sometimes we do try to curtail it, like Brian's saying, is like we try to curtail it to what's actually achievable by most MSPs. Most MSPs, not the ideal MSP that has like a department for everything and a person to do every possible business function, but the MSP that like is having to wear a whole lot of different hats and actually get the thing done. Definitely two different entities.
And that fits into the product thing, because I had that happen once where somebody, I think it was on a webinar actually a couple months ago, where somebody asked, like, is there a conflict of interest, right? Like, are you going to stop developing features because now you don't want to step on toes? Nope. All right. It doesn't happen that way, because what ends up happening for us is, again, the feedback of the CSAT is a perfect example. It's like, we're not out there to murder all the other CSATs out there. Like Seth said, if we can do 80-90% of what you need with our stuff, then that's killer. But we have plenty of people that are always going to need, like, again, department-wide stuff. You see this a lot with enterprise level people, right? They come in, they like CloudRadial, again, using us as an example, and they go, oh, really dig the ticketing feature, but our assessment thing that we built like kicks yours' ass. It's like, whoa, okay, just turn it off. That's it. That's
what we're looking for. Like we totally want that, right? Like we totally want to be the tool belt just as much as the multi-tool, as long as the client is experiencing it, right? And if you don't have the specific tool for it, we'll have something in place. But if you have a specific tool you want to work with, we also want to figure out how to work with that as well. So,
but it's
an interesting balancing act.
To Brian's point, like, I get the tool fatigue. I mean, dude, I've been to the conferences and like I get up, like, as just a person, not a vendor, not like whatever, all these, and I sit down and it's just like pitch. And then as a vendor, you also get to see like, oh, they're new. Here's this person didn't exist. Now you must have this new thing that didn't happen. And it's just like the seat costs, right? Ends up getting to like, it's like, yeah, it's gonna be like $370 per seat now because you need all these tools. And it's like, man, do you actually need them? It seems like a lot of them are like features rather than actually full-fledged things. So in that case, like, those are the ones that to me kind of come and go. So it's like, you'll typically notice the ones that are going to be more like staying power, the ones that actually have, again, rationale, and ones that can't get replaced by like a weekend of coding and stuff. There's ones that are very, very specific and crafted to go deep into that, and those will probably never go away. But again, the ones that do something just because somebody was like, we need this one thing, that's the ones that that cause the greatest fatigue. So I'm not going to pay an extra $50 a month to get something that any developer could do in like a couple of months. Yeah.
So we got got a couple other ones. I'm trying to get to everything we possibly can. And we're coming up on our time, so we do miss something.
I have to go to a demo in 5 minutes too. So I'm
I
like,
know, that's true.
my God.
Poor Ricky is like literally hopping off this thing, gonna go talk for an hour solid. Yeah. I think I got like 5 demos today myself, so it should be interesting.
I never get to show this, and I want to break character for a sec to talk about how no one ever compliments on my tiny little He-Man. I have a tiny He-Man, and it always stares at me. And I hope you guys enjoy tiny little He-Man.
You just want to show them what you're looking at. Well,
yeah, because we were talking about your encyclopedias. I only have the blade, and I was like, I have a He-Man. It's very tiny, and it sits right behind the camera, and I stare into his little tiny eyes when I do this.
Lifting up the skirt a little bit for you guys.
Just a little bit. I want to show you what's going on in my head. Tiny He-Man.
So there was one thing. Oh yeah, Nick Allo asks, do you guys have plans to allow us to offer the product to more clients, but be billed by active users versus devices? Which is interesting because we bill by users or agents deployed, whatever number ends up being higher. So that might be part of the confusion too. You might also be alluding though to a concept of in general, like you should pay for the thing if it's helping you, land more clients. That you should pay for that thing too. But there are other things too, as far as like being able to demo the product, more kind of like a more kind of generic example, a trial environment, so like stuff that we've been looking at and working on. It is interesting when you're working with a product that does pull in so many live data sources. Kind of hard to fake that to a certain degree, but yeah, always something that we want to make sure is available to you guys, because just as much as a piece of software, we're kind of a new and novel approach on how to sell your MSP to prospects and how to continue to sell your MSP to existing clients. So that is something that we're always thinking about. Emily asks, but if your feature request doesn't gain enough votes, but it's something your company requires from the platform, sort of in the situation, and it will determine, unfortunately, if we keep CloudRadial. Emily, that's it's a good point, and it's obviously something that we're always trying to avoid. At the same time, too, we need to make the tool for our partners, right? And so there are some limited use cases where if it's not going to benefit enough of the partners, it doesn't make sense to add to the platform, at least today, but at the same time, if there is what seems to be an obvious limitation, do contact support, get a hold of us, because sometimes there is a way around something or another way of thinking about it in the first place that might satisfy that.
I'm gonna probably have to call it here in a minute, Seth. Because
you gotta call, you got to get to her demo. Thank you everybody for coming out and joining us and listening to us blab for an hour. And thank you so much for the questions. That's very much what makes this thing. We'll be doing this regularly, at least once a month. If we didn't get to some questions now, obviously you can always, we're reachable. You can always just email us directly, right? But come to the next one. We love your questions, and it is a true privilege to work within this community and to be able to talk to you guys.
I'll have more tiny He-Man for you later as well. Thank you.
Up your sword collection.
I will up my sword to many blades.
That's what we heard from the partners, Safi. More swords. I got to get
more blades. We heard the people. No, less CloudRadial, more blades. I got you. I'm ready.
I'm the mother here. Gotta make all my office kids behave.
I have a lot of battle ready katanas ready to go.
Oh yeah. Look at a sweet samurai sword right here. But anyway. All right, everybody. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Catch you later, guys.
All right, bye, y'all.